While my husband was supposedly out of town on a business trip to London, I climbed onto a step stool to reach a few jars on the highest shelf of our pantry. But the moment my eyes landed on what was hidden up there, my 7-year marriage and my relationship with the family, who always called me their biggest disappointment, were officially handed a death sentence. Before I tell you how I tore their entire world apart, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to burn bridges to protect your peace. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old, an independent architect, and a commercial real estate developer in Atlanta. For years, I was the black sheep of my family. I was the one who refused to settle down early, the one who spent her 20s on construction sites in a hard hat instead of attending high society mixers to find a rich husband. My mother, Mama Beatrice, never let me forget how much I embarrassed her. She worshipped my older sister Chloe. Chloe was the golden child, the standard of perfection, because she married Preston Sterling. Preston came from a supposedly wealthy white family, and my mother treated him like royalty. She let him sit at the head of our table during Sunday dinners, while he made passive-aggressive comments about my career choices, implying that a black woman running a commercial development firm was just a cute little hobby. I swallowed my pride for years, thinking my success would eventually earn my family's respect. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Marcus, my husband of 7 years, had kissed my forehead that morning, grabbed his sleek leather duffel bag, and told me he had an urgent wealth management conference in London. Marcus was a sharp, well-dressed financial advisor who always knew the right things to say to charm my mother. I thought I had finally found a partner who respected my ambition. Wanting to do something nice for his return, I decided to make his favorite peach cobbler to freeze. That is why I dragged the wooden step stool into the walk-in pantry. I reached for the vintage glass jars I kept on the very top shelf, the ones we rarely used because they were pushed all the way to the back. My fingers brushed against the cold glass, but instead of the heavy weight of preserves, the jar rattled with a strange metallic clinking sound. I pulled it down and unscrewed the lid. Inside lay a cheap prepaid burner phone, a black flash drive, and a small bank passbook. My heart did not race immediately. At first, I was just profoundly confused. Marcus was a sophisticated guy who loved luxury brands and the latest technology. He did not use cheap plastic burner phones from the grocery store. I pressed the power button on the side of the device. The screen lit up instantly, indicating it had been fully charged just before he left the house. No passcode was required to unlock it. A notification popped up immediately on the home screen. It was a text message received just 2 hours ago. The sender was saved simply with the letter C. I tapped the message open, and the words on the screen made the air completely leave my lungs. Did you get that stupid girl to sign the power of attorney yet? Preston needs the cash injection before Friday or the bank is foreclosing on everything. Do not mess this up, babe. I read the words again, and then a third time. The letter C. Chloe, my older sister, the golden child of our family. The pieces snapped together with a terrifying, violent clarity. Babe. My sister was calling my husband Babe, and they were conspiring to trick me into signing away my assets to save Preston from bankruptcy. All those Sunday dinners where Preston looked down his nose at me. All those times my mother praised Preston's massive real estate empire and told me I should ask him for business advice. It was all a lie. Preston was drowning in debt. His prestigious developments were a crumbling house of cards. And Marcus, the man who promised to protect me and build a future with me, was sleeping with my own sister. They were plotting to feed my hard-earned empire to his bankrupt brother-in-law to save their precious social status. I did not collapse onto the pantry floor. I did not scream or cry or throw the jar against the wall. Growing up as the scapegoat in a household where your mother constantly belittles your worth, hardens you in ways other people cannot understand. They thought I was just some clueless, desperate woman they could manipulate and drain for cash. They assumed I would blindly sign papers because I loved my husband and still desperately wanted my family's validation. They severely underestimated me. I took the flash drive and the bank passbook from the jar, slipping them into the pocket of my jeans. My hands were perfectly steady. The initial shock had instantly vaporized, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I walked out of the pantry, leaving the step stool exactly where it was, and headed straight for my home office to boot up my personal laptop. I needed to see exactly how much of my life they had tried to steal, and more importantly, I needed to start planning exactly how I was going to take everything from them. The screen of my laptop glowed to life in the darkened office. I slid the black flash drive into the port and a window instantly popped up, displaying a list of meticulously organized folders. Marcus was always a perfectionist, a trait that made him a highly successful financial advisor, but was now serving as the exact rope he would hang himself with. I clicked on a folder labeled with the current year, then another simply named Sterling. My pulse quickened as I opened a scanned PDF document. The bold legal header stared back at me. It was a commercial mortgage agreement. My eyes scanned the property address, and a fresh wave of physical nausea hit me. The document was not for our primary residence in Atlanta. The address listed was for a historic brownstone in Savannah. That brownstone was the only thing my grandmother had left exclusively to me before she passed away. She worked as a housekeeper for 40 years to buy that property, and she left it to me because she knew I was the only one in our family who respected the value of hard labor. She explicitly kept my mother, Mama Beatrice, off the deed to protect it from being squandered. Marcus knew how much that house meant to me. He knew it was my untouchable sanctuary. Marcus had secretly leveraged my grandmother's home. I scrolled to the final page of the contract. There, sitting stark and black against the white digital paper, was my signature. It was a flawless forgery. Marcus had practiced the loops and sharp angles of my handwriting until he perfected it. He had even used a digital notary service we frequently relied on for quick business transactions, knowing exactly which loopholes to exploit to bypass my physical presence. The loan amount was staggering. $500,000 pulled directly from the equity of my ancestral home. My hands flew across the keyboard, opening the corresponding bank statements in the next folder. I needed to see where the money had gone. A wire transfer receipt confirmed my absolute worst suspicions. The entire $500,000 had been routed out of a dummy account Marcus set up and funneled straight into the corporate accounts of Sterling Capital. That was the supposedly prestigious investment firm owned by my white brother-in-law, Preston Sterling. The pieces of their ugly puzzle locked into place. Preston loved to parade around at family gatherings in custom-tailored suits, swirling expensive bourbon and acting like he was doing our black family a favor simply by existing in our presence. He boasted constantly about his massive real estate portfolio, but the numbers on this flash drive told a completely different story. Sterling Capital was bleeding cash. Preston was drowning in toxic debt, and his investors were clearly threatening legal action. Chloe, terrified of losing her country club memberships and the luxury lifestyle she constantly flaunted in my face, must have begged Marcus for help. And my husband, ever the opportunistic parasite, saw a chance to secure a permanent seat at Preston's high society table. Marcus forged my signature, stole my inheritance, and handed it over to save his brother-in-law. Before I could dive deeper into the financial wreckage, my cell phone vibrated violently against the desk. The caller ID flashed a picture of Mama Beatrice. Under normal circumstances, I would let it go to voicemail, bracing myself for the inevitable criticism that followed every conversation. Tonight, I needed to hear the sound of the enemy camp. I took a deep breath, smoothing my voice into a mask of calm obedience, and answered the call. Mama Beatrice did not bother with a greeting. Her voice was sharp and commanding, dripping with the entitlement I had endured my entire life. Naya, you need to bring $20,000 to Sunday dinner this weekend. Chloe's private academy tuition for the twins is due on Monday, and Preston has his money tied up in a massive new commercial development. He cannot be bothered to liquidate assets for something so trivial right now. I gripped the edge of my desk. My mother was demanding that I cover her golden child's expenses while praising the very man who had just stolen $500,000 from me. The audacity of the black tax in my family was suffocating. Because I had built a successful architecture firm and clawed my way to financial independence, my mother believed my bank account was a community pot designed to fund Chloe's extravagant life. Mama Beatrice continued, her tone laced with that familiar condescension. Marcus mentioned your firm just closed a big contract. Do not get greedy, Nia. This family supported you when you were just struggling to draw blueprints. Preston is a visionary. He is dealing with international investors, not just picking out tile colors for local office buildings. You are lucky he even acknowledges your little firm. Preston manages an empire, and Chloe is a devoted mother holding it all together. The least you can do is your part to keep this family looking respectable. Bring a cashier's check. Do not embarrass me. They never supported me. When I was eating cheap ramen noodles and working 18-hour days to get my architecture license, my mother was busy buying Chloe designer bags and telling our relatives I was throwing my life away. But confronting her now would only tip my hand. I needed them arrogant. I needed them to believe I was still the desperate, approval-seeking daughter they could easily walk all over. Yes, Mom, I said, my voice eerily steady. I will bring the check on Sunday. See that you do, she snapped and abruptly ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the desk. A dangerous, icy calm washed over me. I was done crying over people who only saw me as an automated teller machine. I picked up my phone again and opened the GPS tracking application. Last year, for Marcus's 35th birthday, I had bought him a brand new Porsche Panamera. Since I paid for it in full, the title, the insurance, and the integrated tracking system were all registered strictly in my name. I tapped the screen to locate the vehicle. Marcus was supposed to be halfway across the Atlantic Ocean on a flight to London. The map zoomed in on a pulsing blue dot right here in Atlanta. The car was not parked at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. The dot was stationary in the underground parking garage of a high-rise luxury condominium complex in Midtown. It was the exact building where Chloe and Preston rented their opulent penthouse. As I stared at the location, another notification dropped from the top of my phone screen. It was an automated fraud alert from the joint platinum credit card I shared with Marcus. A charge of $5,000 had just been authorized at the St. Regis, a five-star luxury hotel located a mere 3 blocks away from Chloe's apartment building. The narrative was sickeningly clear. Marcus and Chloe were not just stealing my money to save Preston. They were using my money to fund their affair right under Preston's nose. They had executed their grand theft, transferred the $500,000 to save the failing Sterling Empire, and were now celebrating their victory in a luxury hotel suite paid for by my credit card. As an architect, I know exactly how to find the weak points in a structure. You locate the load-bearing walls, you identify the stress fractures, and you strike where the foundation is already crumbling. Marcus and Chloe were foolish enough to hand me the sledgehammer. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully drained the family scapegoat and secured their glittering futures. But they had left a digital trail a mile long, and they had no idea that I now held every single piece of evidence in the palm of my hand. I did not cancel the credit card transaction. I let it go through. I wanted them to drink expensive champagne and sleep soundly in their stolen luxury. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. I began transferring every file, every forged document, and every wire receipt from the flash drive to a secure encrypted cloud server. I was going to let them sit down at Sunday dinner smiling and pretending they were untouchable. And then I was going to systematically dismantle their entire lives. The progress bar on my encrypted cloud transfer hit 99%, just as the silence in my home office was shattered by a sharp, demanding ringtone. The screen of my phone lit up, displaying a contact name that instantly made my jaw tighten. Mama Beatrice. Under normal circumstances, I would let it go to voicemail, bracing myself for the inevitable criticism that followed every single conversation we ever had. But tonight, with the digital evidence of my husband and my sister stealing $500,000 from me, currently uploading to a secure server, I needed to hear the sound of the enemy camp. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing my voice into a flawless mask of calm obedience, and answered the call. She did not bother with a greeting. My mother never did when she wanted something. Her voice was sharp and commanding, dripping with the familiar entitlement I had endured my entire life. Nia, you need to bring $20,000 to Sunday dinner this weekend. I sat back in my leather chair, my eyes locked on the finalized transfer screen. $20,000. I kept my tone perfectly neutral, asking what the money was for, even though I already knew it would be some fabricated emergency for her golden child. Chloe's private academy tuition for the twins is due on Monday. Mama Beatrice snapped, as if I had offended her by even asking. Preston has his money tied up in a massive new commercial development. He cannot be bothered to liquidate assets for something so trivial right now. You need to step up. I gripped the edge of my desk, my fingernails digging into the wood. My mother was demanding that I cover her golden child's expenses, while praising the very man who had just stolen $500,000 from my grandmother's estate. The sheer audacity of the black tax in my family was suffocating. Because I had built a successful architecture and real estate development firm, because I had clawed my way to financial independence without a single dime of their help, my mother firmly believed my bank account was a community pot designed to fund Chloe's extravagant lifestyle. When I was eating cheap ramen noodles and working 18-hour days to get my architecture license, my mother was busy buying Chloe designer bags and telling our relatives I was throwing my life away by not marrying young. Now that my name was on the side of commercial buildings across Atlanta, I was suddenly expected to be the family bank. Mama Beatrice continued, her tone laced with that familiar condescension. Marcus mentioned your firm just closed a big contract downtown. Do not get greedy, Nia. This family supported you when you were just struggling to draw blueprints. Preston is a visionary. He is dealing with international investors, not just picking out tile colors for local office buildings. You are lucky a man of his stature even acknowledges your little firm. Preston manages an empire, and Chloe is a devoted mother holding it all together. The least you can do is your part to keep this family looking respectable. A harsh, bitter laugh caught in my throat, but I forced it down. Preston Sterling was not a visionary. He was a mediocre white man who inherited a moderate portfolio, squandered it on terrible investments, and used his proximity to my black family to secure diversity grants he had no business touching. And now he was a thief. He was drowning in toxic debt, and his investors were clearly threatening legal action. Chloe, terrified of losing her country club memberships and the luxury lifestyle she constantly flaunted in my face, must have begged Marcus for help. And my husband, ever the opportunistic parasite, saw a chance to secure a permanent seat at Preston's high society table by forging my signature. But Mama Beatrice did not know that, or maybe she did, and she just did not care as long as Preston maintained the illusion of the wealthy white savior bringing prestige to our family. Are you listening to me, Nia? My mother barked through the speaker, mistaking my silence for hesitation. Do not act like you cannot afford this. Chloe gave this family heirs. She gave us a legacy. What have you done? You just draw buildings. You have no children, so you have no real expenses. Bring a cashier's check on Sunday. Do not embarrass me in front of Preston. The cruelty in her voice was not new, but tonight it struck a different chord. It was the absolute confirmation that I owed these people nothing. They never supported me. They never respected me. They only tolerated my presence because I was useful. My own mother was actively upholding a bankrupt, deceitful man over her own flesh and blood simply because his skin color and his tailored suits gave her the illusion of high society status. Confronting her right now would only tip my hand. If I screamed, if I cried, if I demanded answers about the forgery and the affair, they would have time to scramble. They would hide the money, destroy the burner phone, and spin a narrative that I was acting like a hysterical, jealous sister. I needed them arrogant. I needed them to believe I was still the desperate, approval-seeking daughter they could easily walk all over. I needed them blind to the executioner standing right behind them. Yes, Mom, I said, my voice eerily steady, devoid of any emotion. I will bring the cashier's check on Sunday. See that you do, she snapped and abruptly ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the desk. A dangerous, icy calm washed over my entire body. I was done crying over people who only saw me as an automated teller machine. I was done shrinking myself to make a mediocre man feel tall. I opened a new tab on my computer and logged into my offshore banking portal, a secure account that Marcus knew absolutely nothing about. I had spent years building my empire, and I knew exactly how to dismantle theirs. They wanted me to bring a check to Sunday dinner. They wanted to sit around the dining room table eating my food, drinking my wine, and laughing behind my back, while they spent my grandmother's inheritance. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to show up to Sunday dinner with a smile on my face, and I was going to hand them a piece of paper. But it would not be a donation to Chloe's private school tuition. It was going to be the first step in a highly calculated, utterly ruthless financial slaughter. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and grabbed my favorite fountain pen. It was time to draft a new architectural blueprint, not for a commercial skyscraper, but for the complete and total demolition of Preston Sterling, my husband Marcus, and the family that had always prayed for my downfall. I set my favorite fountain pen down on the smooth mahogany surface of my desk. The legal pad remained blank for now, but my mind was already constructing the framework of their destruction. Before I could begin ripping their lives apart financially, I needed to know exactly where my husband was spending the evening he was supposed to be flying over the Atlantic Ocean. I picked up my phone and opened the vehicle tracking application. Last year, Marcus had complained endlessly about his aging sedan. He insisted that a wealth management director needed to project a certain level of success to acquire high net worth clients. Like a fool desperate to prove my devotion and silence my family's constant criticism, I purchased a brand new Porsche Panamera for his 35th birthday. I paid cash. The title, the insurance, and the integrated tracking system were all registered firmly and exclusively in my name. I distinctly remembered Mama Beatrice sneering at his birthday dinner, loudly whispering to Chloe that it was pathetic how I had to buy my husband's affection because I lacked a softer, more feminine charm. I tapped the screen, waiting for the satellite to pinpoint the vehicle. The map of Atlanta loaded the glowing street grids forming rapidly in the dark office. I fully expected to see the pulsing blue dot sitting idle in the long-term parking lot at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Instead, the map bypassed the airport entirely and zoomed straight into the heart of Midtown. The dot was completely stationary. I zoomed in further, my eyes tracing the familiar street names and intersections. The car was parked in the underground garage of a highly exclusive high-rise luxury condominium complex. I knew that building intimately. I knew the exact layout of the marble lobby, the absurd monthly homeowner fees, and the pretentious concierge desk. It was the exact building where Chloe and Preston rented their opulent penthouse. A bitter taste flooded my mouth as the reality settled over me. Chloe loved to host her high society networking events in that penthouse, pouring expensive wine while making subtle cutting jabs at my demanding work schedule. She always made sure to remind our relatives that Preston provided for her so beautifully that she never had to lift a finger to contribute. Meanwhile, I was the one working 70-hour weeks to build my own development firm. Now my husband's luxury car was sitting in her basement while he was supposedly 30,000 feet in the air. I sat back in my leather chair, the blue dot burning into my vision. Were they upstairs right now? Were they sitting on Chloe's imported Italian leather sofa, laughing about the forged mortgage documents and the $500,000 they had just stolen from my grandmother's estate? I pictured Marcus with his perfectly tailored suit and rehearsed smile pouring Preston a glass of bourbon to celebrate saving the failing Sterling capital empire. Preston would be soaking up the bailout, completely unaware that his perfect wife was slipping away to share a bed with the man handing him the check. Just as that sickening image took shape in my mind, a push notification dropped down from the top edge of my phone screen. It was an automated fraud alert from the joint platinum credit card I shared with Marcus. The bank was flagging a massive, unusual transaction. I tapped the alert, authenticating with my fingerprint, and a digital receipt filled the screen. A charge of $5,000 had just been authorized. I stared at the merchant name. It was not a British airline. It was not a corporate hotel in London. The charge originated from the St. Regis, a five-star luxury hotel located a mere 3 blocks away from Chloe's apartment building. To be absolutely certain, I dialed the premier customer service line on the back of my card. When the agent answered, I kept my voice light and professional. I explained that I was reviewing a recent fraud alert and just wanted to confirm if the card had been used for an online booking or physically swiped at the hotel. The agent verified the details within seconds. The physical card with a matching identification had been presented at the front desk for a premium suite upgrade, and a substantial room service tab. The narrative was now sickeningly flawless. Marcus and Chloe were not just stealing my money to save Preston's crumbling business facade. They were using my money to fund their affair right under Preston's nose. They had executed their grand theft, transferred my grandmother's hard-earned equity to save the sterling illusion. And now my husband and my sister were celebrating their victory in a luxury hotel suite paid for by my credit card. They felt completely invincible. They genuinely believed I was too busy, too trusting, and too desperate for family approval to ever notice the massive financial hemorrhage taking place behind my back. Growing up as the scapegoat in a household where your mother constantly belittles your worth, hardens you in ways other people cannot understand. They thought I was just some clueless woman they could manipulate and drain for cash. They assumed I would blindly sign whatever papers they put in front of me because I loved my husband. They severely underestimated the woman I had become. The fraud alert prompt on my screen asked if I wanted to decline the charge and lock the card. My thumb hovered over the red decline button. If I locked it now, Marcus would be humiliated at the front desk. Chloe would panic. The game would be revealed prematurely. I moved my thumb and clicked the green button to approve the transaction. I wanted them to order the most expensive champagne on the menu. I wanted them to wrap themselves in high thread count sheets and sleep soundly in their stolen luxury. Let them enjoy their $5,000 night. It was going to be the most expensive mistake of their miserable lives. Tomorrow the real game would begin, and by the time I was finished, they would not even have a dime left to pay for their own ruin. I pulled into the sprawling circular driveway of my mother's upscale suburban home. The scent of collard greens, baked macaroni and cheese, and roasted chicken drifted through the heavy oak front door before I even turned the brass knob. Mama Beatrice insisted on a traditional Sunday dinner, not because she loved gathering her family, but because it gave her a weekly stage to demand tribute and parade her prized son-in-law. I stepped into the foyer, my designer heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood. My leather handbag hung heavily from my shoulder, carrying a crisp cashier's check for $20,000. It also carried the absolute certainty that I was about to dismantle every single person in this house. The dining room was a loud mix of clinking silverware and overlapping voices. I walked into the living area and took in the scene. Chloe was draped over a velvet accent chair, sipping a mimosa, and wearing a tennis outfit that cost more than my first car. She looked completely relaxed, entirely unbothered by the fact that she had spent the previous night in a luxury hotel suite with my husband. Then there was Preston. He stood by the grand stone fireplace, a crystal glass of expensive bourbon resting in one hand, a thick cigar burning in the other. He puffed on the cigar, polluting my mother's immaculate living room with thick, acrid smoke. Mama Beatrice absolutely despised smoking indoors. Growing up, she would scream if anyone even brought a damp jacket into her parlor. But because Preston Sterling was the one dropping ashes on her Persian rug, she simply smiled, with wide, admiring eyes, and rushed to open a window. The social dynamics in this house were sickeningly transparent. Preston represented the white generational wealth my mother was utterly desperate to be associated with, and she would let him burn her house down as long as he gave her bragging rights at her country club. Nia, you actually showed up! Preston drawled, his voice cutting through the room the moment he spotted me. I thought you would be chained to a drafting table today, trying to scrape together pennies for your little startup. The room went quiet. I stood perfectly still, smoothing the fabric of my silk blouse. My architecture and real estate development firm had just surpassed $10 million in revenue last quarter. It was not a little startup, and Preston knew it. But minimizing my accomplishments was his favorite parlor trick. I took a step forward, pasting a flawless, unbothered smile on my face. Good afternoon to you too, Preston. I always make time for family. Preston chuckled, a wet, arrogant sound that made my skin crawl. He took a slow step toward me, looking me up and down with blatant condescension. It is actually fascinating, he said, raising his voice so my mother and sister could hear clearly. I was just telling Chloe the other day how surprised I am that a black woman like you has managed to keep a commercial development firm afloat this long. The failure rate is astronomical. Usually the stress completely breaks women with your background. Or the minority business grants just dry up. I watched Chloe hide a smug smile behind her mimosa glass. Mama Beatrice leaned against the dining table, nodding along as if Preston were delivering a profound sermon. Honestly, Preston continued taking another slow sip of his bourbon. Most women with your specific demographic profile are much better suited for administrative work. Customer service may be a cashier at a local branch. It is less taxing on the mind. If your little architecture hobby goes under, let me know. I could introduce you to a regional manager at my bank. They are always looking to fill their diversity quotas on the floor. Laughter erupted in the room. It was not just a polite chuckle. Chloe laughed out loud, and my own mother, the woman who gave birth to me, let out a sharp, approving cackle. Listen to him, Nia, Mama Beatrice chimed in, walking over to pat Preston affectionately on the arm. Preston knows business. He navigates rooms you could not even get a foot into. You need to humble yourself and take his advice. Not everyone is built to run an empire like he does. You should be taking notes instead of acting so defensive all the time. I looked at my mother, then at my sister, and finally at the arrogant white man standing in the center of my family's living room. He was wearing a custom suit, drinking top-shelf liquor, and insulting my intelligence, my race, and my gender all in one breath. He was standing there acting like a king, completely oblivious to the fact that his so-called empire was currently a rotting corpse. He was oblivious to the fact that his corporate accounts were empty. His investors were preparing to sue him for fraud, and the only reason his company had not been seized by the bank on Friday was because his wife was sleeping with my husband to steal $500,000 from my grandmother's estate. He was a broke, desperate thief playing dress-up, and my family was bowing down to him. A hot wave of rage flared in my chest, threatening to rise up my throat and explode into a screaming match. The old Nia, the girl who constantly fought for her mother's approval and screamed to be heard, would have defended her business. She would have listed her profit margins and yelled about her achievements. But I was not that girl anymore. I was an architect holding a sledgehammer, and I knew exactly which load-bearing wall to strike first. I swallowed the rage, letting it settle deep in my stomach, where it turned into pure ice. I kept the pleasant smile plastered on my face, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with Preston. I did not blink. I just stared at him, watching the smug satisfaction slowly falter on his face, as my silence stretched out heavy and sharp. I let him enjoy his little moment of perceived superiority, knowing I was about to drop a bomb that would shatter his entire reality. "Thank you, Preston," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly pitched to carry across the sudden silence of the living room. "I appreciate the unsolicited career advice, but I am actually quite surprised you still have the mental bandwidth to sit around smoking expensive cigars and lecturing me on a Sunday afternoon." Preston stopped mid-puff. He lowered the cigar slowly, a patronizing smirk still clinging to his lips. "Excuse me? I heard Sterling Capital just got denied its third round of mezzanine financing on Friday afternoon." I continued, taking a delicate, unbothered sip from my water glass. Word in the commercial real estate sector travels fast in this city. The underwriters flagged a massive mountain of toxic debt hidden deep in your commercial portfolio. I am guessing Chloe has not had the chance to share that little financial update with Mom yet. The sharp, heavy clatter of sterling silver hitting fine bone china rang out like a gunshot. Chloe had dropped her fork. It bounced off her plate and landed on the Persian rug. Her perfectly manicured hands were trembling visibly, and all the warm color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a frantic mixture of pure terror and raw, unfiltered hatred. She knew I had hit the exact nerve she had been desperately trying to hide from our mother. Preston choked on his bourbon. A harsh, wet cough escaped him as the amber liquid went down the wrong pipe, and his face flushed a deep, angry red. He quickly tried to compose himself, roughly straightening the lapels of his custom blazer, but the thick vein visibly pulsing at his temple betrayed his sudden panic. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Nia," he stammered. The smooth, confident southern drawl he used to assert his dominance had completely vanished, replaced by a defensive bark. "Corporate restructuring is highly complex. It involves high-level acquisitions and asset reallocation that is way above the pay grade of a local contractor like you. You probably overheard some low-level bank tellers gossiping at a coffee shop and completely misunderstood the financial terminology. I tilted my head, feigning genuine innocence while locking my eyes squarely on his. Misunderstood? I do not think so, Preston. The term default is universally understood even by U.S. local minority contractors. Your primary lenders pulled out completely because your debt-to-income ratio is currently sitting dangerously in the red. You are facing foreclosure on 3 major downtown properties by the end of this month. That is not corporate restructuring. That is a total financial collapse. I took a slow step forward, closing the distance between us, forcing him to look slightly down at me while I verbally dismantled his entire existence. You love to lecture me about the failure rates for Black women in business, but my firm owns every single property we develop outright. No toxic debt, no over-leveraged assets. We run purely in the black. Meanwhile, you inherited a fortune from your daddy, and you gambled it all away on terrible commercial investments because you arrogant enough to think your white skin and your last name would magically protect you from your own glaring incompetence. You arrogant little, Preston snarled, taking a heavy step toward me. He used his physical size to try and intimidate me, looming over my space, a tactic he undoubtedly used to silence women in boardrooms all the time. But I did not flinch. I did not back away. I stood my ground, my chin held high, watching him sweat right through his expensive tailored shirt. He was terrified because I had just stripped him naked in front of his captive audience. He relied entirely on Mama Beatrice's blind worship and Chloe's desperate need for high society status to maintain his illusion of absolute power. And I had just set fire to his stage. Transitioning assets. I repeated, letting out a soft, mocking laugh that echoed in the tense room. Is that what they call begging venture capitalists for emergency bridge loans these days? I am just surprised you are standing in my mother's living room, drinking her top-shelf liquor, instead of sitting in your office packing your belongings into cardboard boxes. Chloe stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly and violently against the hardwood floor. Do not listen to her, Preston, she said, her voice shrill, frantic, and desperate. She hurried to his side, gripping his arm like a lifeline, but her eyes kept darting nervously back to me. She is just trying to start drama because she is bitter. Nia has always been bitter and jealous of us. She is making things up to ruin our Sunday. Bitter about what, Chloe? I challenged, my voice deadly calm. Bitter that you have to fake a perfect life on social media while your husband begs the bank for bailout money. Bitter that your country club dues are about to bounce next week. Mama Beatrice, who had been standing frozen by the dining table trying to process the financial terms I had just thrown around, suddenly snapped back to life. She rushed forward, physically wedging herself between me and Preston. She turned her back to the white man who was secretly bankrupting her family and faced me with eyes full of pure, unadulterated venom. The polished matriarch facade shattered entirely, revealing the toxic, controlling woman beneath. How dare you speak to Preston that way under my roof? My mother hissed, her voice vibrating with a rage she usually reserved for closed doors. She slammed her palm down on the mahogany dining table with such force that the fine china rattled and a wine glass tipped over, spilling dark red liquid across the pristine white tablecloth. You have always been consumed by jealousy, Nia. From the very moment Chloe married a man of actual substance, you have done nothing but try to tear them down. Preston stood a little taller behind her, his panic from seconds ago quickly morphing back into that sickening, arrogant posture. He smoothed his tailored lapels, happily letting a black mother tear down her own daughter to protect his fragile ego, just like he let my stolen money pay his toxic debts. You think because your little commercial development firm landed a few lucky contracts that you are suddenly on his level. Mama Beatrice continued, taking an aggressive step toward me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a lifelong disdain she no longer bothered to hide. Preston brings prestige to this family. He brings generational wealth and open doors you could never dream of walking through. What did you bring us? For years, you were a struggling nobody, embarrassing this family by wearing hard hats and getting dirt under your fingernails while Chloe was securing our legacy. You should be on your knees thanking Preston for even allowing you to sit at the same dinner table as him. Chloe immediately chimed in, her voice regaining its usual shrill, entitled confidence now that she was safely tucked behind our mother's shield. She is just projecting, Mom. Nia is completely alone in her success. She works 70 hours a week because she has absolutely nothing else in her life. She looks at Preston building a massive empire for our family, and she wants to destroy it because she knows she will never have the kind of class and security that I have. I looked at the two of them. My mother and my sister were fiercely defending a white man who was actively robbing our family blind while aggressively degrading the black daughter who was currently standing there as a self-made millionaire. The deep-rooted self-hatred and the blind worship of proximity to whiteness in this room was almost tragic. Almost. But I had run out of sympathy for these people a long time ago. I am done listening to your bitter fantasies and your disrespectful outbursts, Mama Beatrice snapped. She thrust her manicured hand out toward me, palm facing up in a rigid demand. Where is the cashier's check I told you to bring? You owe this family for everything we endured while you were trying to find yourself. $20,000 for the twins' tuition is the bare minimum you should be contributing. She pointed a sharp, accusing finger at the floor near Preston's designer shoes. You are going to hand that check directly to Preston, and you are going to apologize to him for your blatant disrespect. The only good decision you ever made in your entire life was marrying Marcus, and I am certain even he is utterly exhausted from dealing with your constant pathetic need to prove yourself. I stared at my mother's outstretched hand. This was the absolute pinnacle of the black tax. I was being ordered to finance the lavish lifestyle of my sister and her fraudulent husband, and I was expected to beg for their forgiveness while I did it. I was expected to pay for the privilege of being insulted. A year ago, this exact demand would have crushed me. It would have sent me into an emotional spiral, desperately writing the check just to buy a fleeting moment of peace and familial acceptance. Today, it was just the final nail in their collective coffin. I reached into my designer leather handbag. My fingers brushed against the crisp envelope containing the cashier's check. I pulled it out slowly, intentionally, letting my expression soften into a mask of sudden forced submission. I dropped my shoulders slightly, breaking my intense eye contact with Preston and looking down at the floor. I needed them to feel victorious. I needed them to believe that Mama Beatrice had successfully put the rebellious black sheep back in her place. I needed them to let their guard down completely. You are right, Mom, I said, pitching my voice to sound exhausted and defeated. I was out of line. The stress of running the firm and dealing with contractors all week has been getting to me, and I took my frustration out on Preston. I should not have brought up workplace gossip at the family dinner table. I am sorry. Preston let out a loud, highly exaggerated sigh of relief. He stepped out from behind my mother, his chest puffed out with unearned superiority. Apology accepted, Nia. He drawled, a smug grin spreading across his face. We all know how emotional you women get when the pressure of the business world becomes too much to handle. Just leave the heavy lifting to the men. We will make sure you are taken care of. I stepped forward, holding the white envelope out toward Preston. He reached for it eagerly, a greedy, desperate gleam returning to his eyes. He needed this $20,000 just to keep his country club memberships active while he waited for my stolen $500,000 to clear his corporate accounts. But just as his fingers were about to brush the edge of the paper, the heavy oak front door swung open with a loud, echoing click. Every head in the dining room turned toward the foyer. I smoothly pulled my hand back, sliding the white envelope containing the $20,000 cashier check right back into the deep pocket of my leather handbag. Preston grasped at empty air. His fingers twitched, and the look of sheer, starved panic that flashed across his pale face was absolutely delicious. He was seconds away from getting his hands on my hard-earned money to keep his country club facade alive, and now it was safely tucked away. Marcus stepped into the entryway. My husband stood there holding a massive bouquet of long-stemmed red roses, wearing his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He reached up and loosened his expensive silk tie, letting out a heavy, exaggerated sigh. He rubbed his eyes, playing the role of the bone-tired, jet-lagged executive to absolute perfection. Marcus, my goodness. Mama Beatrice gasped, her hands flying to her chest. Her entire demeanor instantly shifted from toxic dictator to doting mother-in-law. What are you doing here? You are supposed to be landing in London right now. Marcus offered her a weary, handsome smile. The airline had a catastrophic mechanical failure, about 3 hours over the Atlantic, Mama Beatrice. They had to turn the entire plane around and route us back to Hartsfield Jackson. It was an absolute nightmare. We spent half the night sitting on the tarmac, waiting for clearance to deplane. But the moment they let us off, I knew my beautiful wife would be here for Sunday dinner. So I grabbed these roses and came straight over. He sounded so sincere. His voice had the perfect amount of gravelly exhaustion. If I had not spent the entire night watching his car sit in my sister's luxury parking garage, while my credit card footed the bill for a 5-star hotel suite 3 blocks away, I might have actually believed him. I might have rushed into his arms and thanked God he was safe. Instead, I looked at the man I had married 7 years ago and saw nothing but a parasitic stranger. "Oh, you poor thing," Mama Beatrice cooed, rushing forward to take the roses from his hands. "Look at this devoted husband, Nia. Most men would have gone straight home to sleep, but he came all the way here just to see you. You are a very lucky woman." Preston cleared his throat loudly, desperately trying to yank the attention back to his financial bailout. "Marcus, good to see you, man." Preston barked, his voice tight. Nia and I were actually just finishing up a little family business. Nia about that check. I did not even look at Preston. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus, letting a bright, loving smile stretch across my face. I stepped past my mother and walked directly toward my husband. "Darling, I am so glad you are safe," I said, my voice thick with fake relief. I threw my arms around his neck, pulling him into a tight, affectionate embrace. Marcus wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in my shoulder. "I missed you," he murmured. I pressed my face against the collar of his suit jacket. I took a slow, deliberate breath. There was no sterile airplane cabin smell on his clothes. There was no scent of recycled terminal air or jet fuel. Marcus smelled strongly of bergamot and cedarwood, the exact signature scent of the complimentary body wash provided in the premium suites at the St. Regis Hotel. And lingering just underneath that expensive soap was the heavy, distinct floral notes of Chloe custom mixed perfume. I pulled back slightly, keeping my hands resting on his shoulders. My thumb brushed against the crisp, white fabric of his shirt collar. Right there, hidden just beneath the fold of the collar, was a faint but unmistakable smudge. A deep, rich shade of burgundy. My heart did not break. It turned into a block of solid ice. I kept my hand resting right beside the lipstick stain. I slowly shifted my gaze over Marcus' shoulder, looking directly past him and straight into the dining room. My eyes locked dead onto Chloe. Chloe was frozen in her chair. She was gripping her crystal mimosa glass so tightly her knuckles were turning white. Her lips were parted in silent panic, and they were painted the exact same custom shade of burgundy red. For one agonizing, suspended second, Chloe and I stared at each other. Her eyes darted from my face down to my thumb, resting intentionally right next to the lipstick stain on my husband's collar. I watched the blood completely drain from her face. She stopped breathing. She knew that I knew. She realized that Marcus had been sloppy, that he had not scrubbed himself clean after their $5,000 night together, and that I was currently staring right at the physical evidence of their betrayal. "Nia, the check," Preston demanded again, taking a step toward the foyer. His voice was getting desperate now. He was completely oblivious to the silent psychological warfare happening right in front of him. He just wanted my money to save his sinking ship. I finally pulled my hand away from Marcus' shirt. I turned to look at Preston, my expression a picture of innocent distraction. "Oh, Preston, I am so sorry," I said, patting my handbag. With Marcus arriving after such a terrifying flight ordeal, I completely lost my train of thought. My mind is just spinning. I think it is best if I just hold on to this for now. I will wire the tuition money directly to the private academy accounting office tomorrow morning. It is much more secure that way, and it saves you the hassle of going to the bank. Preston's mouth dropped open. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his face. Wiring the money to the school meant he could not intercept the cash to pay his country club fees or cover his immediate toxic debts, but he could not argue against it without admitting to Mama Beatrice that he intended to misuse the funds. He was trapped, forced to stand there and nod while his financial lifeline was ripped away. "That is very responsible of you," Nia, Mama Beatrice said, completely missing the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "See Preston, she is finally learning how to handle family matters properly." I turned my attention back to Marcus, linking my arm through his. I looked up at him, then let my eyes drift back to Chloe, who looked like she was about to vomit right onto the Persian rug. "I am just so glad you are home," I said, my voice sweet and steady. "We have so much to catch up on." The drive back to our house was a masterclass in psychological endurance. I sat in the passenger seat of the Porsche I had purchased, listening to the steady hum of the engine, while Marcus smoothly recounted the fabricated details of his terrible airport experience. He described the mechanical failure, the frustrated passengers, and the terrible airport food with such compelling detail that I almost admired his sociopathic commitment to the role. I nodded at all the right moments, offered soft words of sympathy, and kept my hands neatly folded in my lap to prevent myself from reaching over and wrapping them around his throat. The moment we stepped inside our custom-built home, a property I designed down to the very last baseboard, Marcus dropped his duffel bag in the foyer. He let out a long breath, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the weight of a grueling international flight. I walked toward the kitchen to pour myself a glass of cold water to wash away the lingering taste of my mother dining room, but Marcus caught my hand. He pulled me back gently, wrapping his arms around me from behind. He pressed a soft kiss to my temple right above where my pulse was currently hammering a frantic, violent rhythm. "You feel so tense, baby," he murmured, his hands sliding down to massage my shoulders. "Your mother actually texted me while we were in the car. She said you had a bit of an episode at dinner before I walked in. She said you were yelling at Preston and acting completely out of character." I kept my eyes fixed on the marble kitchen island. An episode. That was the word my mother and my husband had silently agreed upon to describe me standing up for myself. I took a slow breath, forcing my muscles to relax under his treacherous hands. "I was just tired, Marcus. It has been a long week dealing with contractors, and Preston knows exactly how to push my buttons. I should not have let him get to me." Marcus turned me around, his expression shifting into a mask of deep paternal concern. He reached up and tucked a stray braid behind my ear. "It is more than just being tired, Nia. I have been watching you lately. You are burning the candle at both ends, and it is starting to affect your mental health. You are snapping at your family. You are making up these wild scenarios about Preston finances. Your mother is genuinely worried about your psychological state, and frankly, so am I." The audacity of his manipulation was breathtaking. He was standing in the house I paid for, wearing a shirt stained with my sister lipstick, subtly trying to convince me that I was losing my grip on reality. He was weaponizing my ambition, using my long hours at the architecture firm as proof that I was mentally unstable. This was classic textbook gaslighting, executed with the terrifying precision of a man who needed his wife to doubt her own mind so he could pick her pockets clean. "You do not have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders," Nia, Marcus continued, his voice dropping an octave into a soothing, hypnotic cadence. "You are always trying to be the strong black woman, the one who proves everyone wrong. But you are exhausting yourself. You are building this massive company, but you are losing your grip on what matters. You need to let me take the wheel for a while." He stepped away from me for a brief second, walking over to his leather briefcase resting on the foyer bench. He popped the gold clasps and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope. He carried it back into the kitchen and placed it carefully on the marble counter between us, tapping the surface of the paper with his index finger. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and deliberately uncertain. This is the solution, he said, flashing that brilliant, trustworthy smile that had fooled me for 7 years. I actually had a long conversation with Preston about this a few weeks ago. For all his faults, Preston really understands generational wealth preservation. He pointed out that your assets are completely fragmented. Your business accounts, your personal properties, the brownstone your grandmother left you, they are all sitting exposed. If you make one mistake on a commercial build, a lawsuit could wipe out everything you have worked for. I stared at the manila envelope. He was actively invoking the name of the white man he was currently bailing out with my stolen money, using him as an authority figure to validate his next move. So I had our attorneys draft up a comprehensive family trust, Marcus explained, sliding the documents out of the envelope. It is a brilliant financial vehicle. We consolidate every single asset you own, your firm, the commercial properties, the bank accounts, under one unified umbrella. Because I am a licensed wealth manager, I will act as the primary trustee. I will handle all the administrative burden, the tax liabilities, and the asset protection. You will not have to worry about a single financial decision ever again. You can just focus on drawing your beautiful buildings and getting your mental health back on track. I looked down at the documents. The bold legal font stared back at me. It was not a protective family trust. I did not need a law degree to know exactly what this was. If I signed my name on the dotted lines provided at the bottom of these pages, I would be legally transferring 100% of my controlling interest in my own company directly to Marcus. I would be handing him the keys to the empire I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. He and Chloe were not just satisfied with the $500,000 they had already stolen from my grandmother's house. They wanted the whole kingdom. They wanted to strip me down to the bone, leave me with nothing, and convince me I was crazy while they did it. Marcus handed me a sleek silver pen. He stepped close again, his chest pressing against my back, his hand resting heavily on my hip. "Just sign right there at the bottom, baby," he whispered against my ear. "Let me protect our future. Let me take the heavy lifting off your plate so we can finally relax. Maybe we can even start talking about having those kids we always wanted." He was using my deepest vulnerability, my desire for a family, as the final bait. I picked up the silver pen. I held it over the signature line, feeling the cold metal against my fingers. I could feel Marcus holding his breath behind me. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. He thought he had done it. He thought he had successfully broken my spirit and manipulated me into signing away my life. I let the tip of the pen hover a millimeter above the paper, then I slowly set it down on the marble counter. I turned to face him, offering him a look of absolute, overwhelming exhaustion. I placed my hands flat against his chest. "You are so right, Marcus. I am just so incredibly tired. My brain is completely fried from the tension at dinner today." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting to the unsigned papers. "Nia, it will only take a second to sign. Then you can go straight to sleep." I shook my head, leaning my weight against him as if I could barely stand. "I want to read through everything when I have a clear head, baby. You know how meticulous I am with contracts. If I sign this while I'm exhausted, I will just end up having a panic attack in the middle of the night, worrying if I missed a typo. Leave it right here on the counter. I promise I will make myself a pot of coffee first thing tomorrow morning, read through every single page, and sign it before you even wake up." Marcus' jaw tightened infinitesimally. He hated delays. He needed this signed so he could merge my company assets with Preston's failing portfolio before the week ended. But pushing me too hard right now, after he just spent 10 minutes telling me how mentally unstable and exhausted I was, would break his carefully constructed character. He had to play the patient, understanding husband. He forced a warm smile and kissed my forehead. "Of course, baby. Take your time. Tomorrow morning is perfectly fine. I just want what is best for you." He turned and headed upstairs to take a shower, undoubtedly rushing to wash Chloe perfume off his skin. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the stack of legal documents meant to serve as my financial execution. I was not going to sign them tomorrow morning. I was going to take these papers straight to my ruthless bulldog of an attorney, and we were going to turn Marcus' brilliant family trust into the exact weapon that would send him straight to a federal prison. I did not wait for the sun to fully rise. By 5 in the morning, I was already dressed in a sharp tailored navy suit. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, letting the rich aroma fill the kitchen to maintain the illusion of my normal morning routine. I left a freshly poured mug on the counter next to a pale yellow sticky note. The note read that I had to rush to a construction site for an emergency inspection, but I took the trust documents with me to review during my lunch break. It was a perfectly believable lie. Marcus would wake up, see the coffee, read the note, and assume his exhausted, overworked wife was right on schedule for her own financial slaughter. I grabbed the heavy manila envelope, walked out the front door, and climbed into my car. The drive to downtown Atlanta was a blur of neon traffic lights and morning fog. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of a sleek, glass-fronted high-rise and took the private elevator straight to the top floor. Jordan was already waiting for me in his corner office. Jordan was not just a lawyer, he was a legal predator in a custom Tom Ford suit. He was the brilliant, relentless corporate attorney who helped me incorporate my development firm years ago when no one else took a young black female architect seriously. He knew every single piece of my financial portfolio because he helped me build the legal walls that protected it. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I walked into his office, bypassed the plush visitor chairs, and dropped the thick stack of papers directly onto his glass desk. "Marcus wants me to sign this," I said, keeping my voice clipped and strictly professional. He told me it was a unified family trust to protect my assets from commercial liabilities. He said he and Preston collaborated on it. Jordan raised a single eyebrow. He picked up his reading glasses, slid them onto his face, and picked up a red pen. He did not say a word as he began flipping through the crisp white pages. For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the sprawling office was the sharp scratch of his pen, underlining clauses and striking through paragraphs. With every page he turned, his posture grew more rigid. His jaw locked tightly, a visible muscle feathering in his cheek. Finally, Jordan tossed the red pen onto the desk. It landed with a sharp clatter. He took off his glasses and looked up at me. His eyes were burning with a quiet, lethal fury. "Nia," he started, his voice dangerously low. "If you had signed your name at the bottom of these pages, you would currently be trespassing in your own company building." I crossed my arms over my chest, demanding the exact breakdown. "Walk me through it." "This is not a family trust," Jordan explained, sliding the heavily marked document back toward me. "It is dressed up to look like one on the first 2 pages. But if you look at Section 4, right under the Asset Allocation Clause, this contract actually establishes an irrevocable transfer of ownership. You are not placing your assets into a protective umbrella. You are signing away 100% of your voting shares, your liquid capital, and your intellectual property to a newly formed holding company." He pointed a long finger at a specific paragraph buried deep in the legal jargon. "Look at the name of the entity. Sterling Vanguard Holdings. It is a shell corporation registered in Delaware. Delaware allows for complete corporate anonymity, meaning the true owners of the shell company are shielded from public record. But because I know exactly how these fraudulent structures are built, I can tell you right now who holds the keys. Marcus is listed as the primary managing director, and Preston is undoubtedly the silent majority shareholder." I stared at the red ink bleeding through the paper. They were not just trying to steal my cash reserves to bail out Preston failing investments. They wanted to consume my entire identity. "If you signed this," Jordan continued, his tone methodical and grim, "Marcus would legally have the power to liquidate your commercial properties by this afternoon. He could empty your business operating accounts. He could legally fire you from the very architecture firm you founded. You would have absolutely no legal recourse because you willingly transferred your power of attorney and your asset ownership to their shell corporation. You would be left with nothing but the clothes on your back while Marcus and Preston walked away with a $10 million development firm." A cold, sharp realization settled over me. This was the ultimate culmination of my family toxic dynamic. My mother, Mama Beatrice, had spent my entire life grooming me to believe I was inferior, setting the stage for Chloe and Preston to feel entitled to anything I managed to build. Marcus had played the supportive husband, studying my vulnerabilities, learning exactly how exhausted I was so he could strike when I was too tired to read the fine print. They all looked at a successful black woman and saw nothing but a resource to be harvested and discarded. Jordan leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together on the desk. "We need to go to the authorities right now, Nia. The forged mortgage on your grandmother Brownstone is a federal crime. Wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. I can have Marcus in handcuffs before noon. I can file an emergency injunction to freeze Preston accounts. We can burn them to the ground today." I looked at my fierce protective attorney. The temptation to let him loose was incredibly strong. I could picture the police dragging Marcus out of our custom-built home. I could picture Preston sweating in a stark interrogation room. But sending them to jail immediately would be a quick, chaotic explosion. Mama Beatrice would instantly spin the narrative, painting me as a vindictive, crazy woman who set up her husband. Chloe would play the victim, crying to her high society friends that I destroyed her family out of pure jealousy. "No," I said softly. My voice was steady, void of any panic. Jordan frowned, clearly confused by my refusal. "Nia, they are actively draining your grandmother equity. They are trying to steal your company. We cannot sit on this." "I did not say we are going to sit on it, Jordan. I said we are not calling the police. Not yet." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. I could see two of the commercial high-rises my firm had designed, standing tall in the morning sun. I built those buildings from nothing but sketches on grid paper. I knew how to lay a foundation, and I knew how to execute a controlled demolition. "If we arrest Marcus today," I explained, turning back to face my attorney, Preston, "we'll just declare bankruptcy and hide behind his white-collar lawyers. Chloe will divorce Marcus and pretend she knew nothing about the affair or the theft. My mother will turn them into martyrs. They will survive. I do not want them to survive this, Jordan. I want them absolutely decimated. I want Preston to feel the exact same terror he tried to inflict on me. I want them to believe they won right up until the floor completely drops out from under their feet." Jordan leaned back in his chair, a slow, calculating smile replacing his initial frustration. He understood exactly what I was asking for. "You want to play a bigger game." I walked back to his desk and tapped the forged Shell Corporation documents. "I am going to go home, and I am going to smile at my husband, and I am going to hand him these exact documents with my signature on the bottom line. I am going to give him the keys to the castle." Jordan's eyes widened slightly, the legal gears turning rapidly in his head. "You cannot sign this, Nia. If you do, it is legally binding." I leaned forward, placing both hands flat on his glass desk. "I am not going to sign away my assets, Jordan, because by the time Marcus files this paperwork tomorrow, those assets will no longer belong to me. We are going to build a ghost ship. We are going to create a blind trust, and we are going to do it in the next 4 hours." Jordan did not waste a single second. He hit a button on his desk phone, ordering his senior paralegals to cancel his entire schedule for the day, forward all incoming calls, and lock the office doors. For the next 4 hours, that glass-walled corner office turned into a high-stakes financial war room. Jordan and I sat side by side at his conference table, systematically dismantling the very empire I had spent my entire adult life building, purely so we could move it completely out of enemy reach. We established an irrevocable offshore blind trust. We based it in a jurisdiction with the most aggressive, impenetrable asset protection laws on the planet. One by one, we initiated the legal transfers. We moved the deeds to every single commercial property my firm had developed. We routed all the capital from my high-yield business accounts. We even legally reassigned the intellectual property rights and the operational licenses of my architecture firm. We took everything out of my personal name and placed it securely inside the blind trust. I surrendered direct control to an independent, fiercely loyal corporate trustee that Jordan had vetted for years. By the time the digital clock on Jordan's desk flashed 11 in the morning, the agonizing process was complete. Every transfer was legally authenticated and time-stamped. On paper, I officially owned absolutely nothing. I was a financial ghost. My bank accounts were hollow. My properties were gone. My firm belonged to an overseas entity. Now, Jordan said, leaning back in his chair and exhaling a long, heavy breath. Bring out the garbage. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick manila envelope Marcus had given me the night before. I slid the fraudulent family trust documents onto the glass table. Jordan pointed to the bottom of the final page, right where Marcus had helpfully placed a small yellow sticky note to indicate where I needed to sign my life away to Sterling Vanguard Holdings. I picked up my pen. Because all my assets had already been legally transferred to the blind trust 2 hours prior, my personal signature was now completely useless. I was signing away my rights to an estate that no longer existed. The contract Marcus thought was his golden ticket was actually just a worthless stack of paper transferring a hollow, empty shell. It was a masterpiece of legal deception, and I executed it with a steady, unwavering hand. I signed my name perfectly on the dotted line. I drove back to my custom-built house just past noon. I pulled my car into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the quiet cabin for a few minutes. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I needed to bury the sharp, calculated architect who had just executed a massive corporate vanishing act. I needed to resurrect the exhausted, compliant, beaten-down wife that Marcus and my family expected to see. I dropped my shoulders, forcing my posture to slouch. I softened my eyes, replacing the cold fury with a look of overwhelming fatigue. I let out a shaky breath and walked through the front door. Marcus was pacing in the kitchen. He was holding a cup of coffee, pretending to look over some digital charts on his tablet, but the nervous tension radiating from his body was palpable. He looked up the second he heard my heels click against the hardwood floor. Nia, he said quickly, setting the tablet down. I saw your note. You had an emergency site inspection. Yes, I sighed, rubbing my temples as I walked toward the marble kitchen island. One of the contractors poured the wrong foundation mix on the new commercial site. It was an absolute disaster. I spent the entire morning screaming at project managers. I let my voice crack just a little, playing heavily into the narrative that the stress of my career was finally breaking me down. Marcus rushed over, taking my handbag and placing a supportive hand on the small of my back. He guided me to one of the plush bar stools. I told you, baby, he murmured, his voice dripping with that fake, sickening sympathy. You are carrying too much weight. You are going to work yourself into an early grave if you do not let go of some of this control. I looked up at him, letting my eyes well with perfectly timed, unshed tears. You are right, Marcus. I am just so incredibly tired. I cannot keep fighting every single day. I thought about what you said last night about Preston understanding how to preserve generational wealth. I realized I am just standing in my own way because I am too stubborn to ask for help. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out the manila envelope. I slid it slowly across the cool marble counter toward him. I read through the documents during my lunch break. I lied smoothly. I signed right where you told me to. I want you to manage everything, Marcus. I want you to take the company, the accounts, the properties, all of it. Put it under the family trust. Just protect us. Marcus stared at the envelope. His eyes widened, and for a split second, the polished mask of the loving husband completely slipped. Pure, unadulterated, ravenous greed illuminated his face. He looked like a starving animal that had just been handed a piece of raw meat. He snatched the envelope off the counter with a speed that almost made me flinch. His fingers fumbled slightly as he opened the metal clasp and pulled out the thick stack of papers. He flipped frantically to the very last page. When his eyes landed on my signature at the bottom of the document, a massive, victorious grin stretched across his face. He had won. He genuinely believed he had just legally stolen a $10 million empire and handed it over to a white man who openly despised me. He quickly shoved the papers back into the envelope, trying to compose himself and hide his elation. He walked around the island and pulled me up into a tight, suffocating hug. He kissed the top of my head, burying his face in my hair. You did the right thing, Nia, he whispered, his voice trembling with adrenaline. You have no idea how much better our lives are going to be now. I am going to take care of everything. You will never have to stress about a financial decision again. I wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my cheek against his expensive suit jacket. Thank you, baby, I murmured softly. While I held him, my eyes drifted to his smartphone resting face up on the kitchen counter. A text message banner flashed across the locked screen. The sender was Preston. The message read, "Did she sign it yet? The bank is demanding proof of incoming collateral by 3 o'clock today." Marcus abruptly pulled away from our embrace. He grabbed his phone and the manila envelope in one swift motion. "Baby, I need to run to my office right now," he said, already backing toward the foyer. "The notary needs to stamp these before the county clerk office closes. I want to get this filed immediately, so the asset protection kicks in tonight. I will pick up dinner on my way home. Just rest okay." I nodded, offering him a weak, grateful smile. He practically sprinted out the front door. The moment I heard the engine of his Porsche roar to life and speed out of the driveway, my weak posture vanished. I stood up perfectly straight. I walked over to the kitchen sink, poured myself a fresh glass of ice water, and took a long, refreshing sip. Marcus was currently racing through Atlanta traffic to hand a bankrupt man an envelope filled with absolutely nothing. But I was not finished. Protecting my assets was only defense. Now it was time to go on the offensive. I walked straight up the stairs to my home office, locked the door, and opened my laptop. I had secured my own kingdom. It was time to aggressively conquer theirs. The moment Marcus's tires squealed out of our driveway, I pulled up a highly encrypted communication channel on my laptop. I did not contact a marriage counselor or cry over the shattered remains of my personal life. I contacted Elias. Elias was a ruthless ghost-like broker operating deep within the distressed debt market. He specialized in buying up toxic commercial loans from panicked banking institutions, desperate to clear their balance sheets before quarter end. I had kept him on a lucrative retainer for years, using his anonymous network to quietly acquire undervalued real estate. Today I was using him to buy a human being. I typed a rapid, precise message into the secure portal. "I need the entire debt portfolio for Sterling Capital. First Heritage National Bank holds the primary notes. They are preparing to foreclose on Preston Sterling by Friday. Buy it all. Do not negotiate for a discount. Pay whatever premium they want to expedite the transfer of the deed of trust immediately. Route the entire purchase through Obsidian Financial so my personal name never touches a single piece of the paperwork." Elias replied within 60 seconds. "That is a massive portfolio of highly toxic garbage, Nia. It will cost you $12 million in liquid cash to buy the paper outright. Are you absolutely certain you want to absorb this kind of liability?" I looked at the bank balance sitting safely inside my newly formed offshore blind trust. It was the physical manifestation of a decade of blood, sweat, and relentless ambition. It was the empire my family told me a black woman could never build. "Yes," I typed back. "Execute the wire transfer right now." For the next 3 hours, I sat in the sterile silence of my home office, watching the cursor blink on my screen. I visualized Marcus sweating in a county clerk's office, eagerly filing a stack of worthless, empty corporate documents. He genuinely thought he was injecting my hard-earned millions into Preston's dying company to save their luxurious facade. He had no idea that the very millions he was trying to steal were currently flying across international wires, being used to purchase the very ground he walked on. Preston Sterling had built his entire identity on the illusion of generational white wealth. He walked into my mother's house every single Sunday, dripping in unearned arrogance, looking down his nose at me, because I actually worked for a living. He thought his skin color and his tailored suits gave him a permanent pass from failure. Mama Beatrice worshipped him for it, constantly demanding that I pay the black tax to subsidize his glamorous life with my sister. They all thought they could just snap their fingers, and a successful black woman's assets would be served to them on a silver platter to cover up a mediocre white man's gross incompetence. My phone vibrated violently against the desk. It was a secure email notification from Elias. Attached was a 300-page digital document. I clicked it open, my pulse thrumming a steady, powerful rhythm against my throat. The header read, "Assignment of Deed of Trust and Promissory Notes." I scrolled rapidly down to the execution clause. First Heritage National Bank had officially relinquished all rights, titles, and interests in the commercial loans belonging to Sterling Capital. The debt had been fully and legally assigned to Obsidian Financial. I owned it. I owned every single red cent of Preston Sterling's catastrophic debt. I pulled up the exact terms of the promissory notes he had signed years ago. He had leveraged absolutely everything to build his fake empire. The commercial development sites were collateral. The luxury penthouse he shared with my sister Chloe, where Marcus had parked my Porsche last night, was collateral. Even the fleet of imported cars he loved to flaunt at the country club was tied up in the aggressive cross-collateralization clauses. If the primary note holder called the debt and Preston failed to produce the cash, the liquidations would be immediate, absolute, and utterly devastating. I leaned back in my leather chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Preston and Marcus were probably pouring themselves a glass of expensive bourbon right now, toasting to their successful heist. They thought they had outsmarted the system. They thought they had secured a massive financial lifeline that would keep them drinking champagne in high society for the next 20 years. They had not secured a lifeline. They had just walked blindly into a financial slaughterhouse. As the new primary note holder, I did not even have to wait for the bank's original Friday deadline. The contracts included a standard acceleration clause triggered by the unauthorized transfer of corporate equity. That was exactly what Marcus had just attempted to do by filing those fraudulent shell company papers. Marcus's desperate, greedy rush to steal my company had legally given me the exact ammunition I needed to call in Preston's entire debt portfolio immediately. I possessed the legal right to demand $12 million in cash by tomorrow morning or seize every single asset tied to the Sterling name. I picked up my phone and dialed Jordan's private line. He answered on the first ring. "It is done," I said, my voice cold and sharp as a newly forged blade. Obsidian Financial now holds 100% of Sterling Capital's debt. I could hear the predatory smile in Jordan's voice. "Excellent. I just received word from my contacts at the county clerk. Marcus officially filed the transfer of your shell company with the state 10 minutes ago. He committed corporate fraud on public record. He handed us the rope. What is our next move, Nia?" I turned my chair to look out the window at the setting sun, watching the sky turn the color of bruised plums. Tomorrow is the grand ribbon-cutting ceremony for Preston's new Oakwood Commercial Plaza. Mama Beatrice and Chloe have been bragging about it for months. They invited the mayor, the city council, and every high society investor in Atlanta. They want a massive public spectacle to celebrate their legacy and solidify their social status. I paused, letting the absolute certainty of their impending destruction settle over me like a heavy velvet cloak. Draft the foreclosure notices, Jordan. Draft the asset seizure warrants. I am going to attend that ribbon cutting tomorrow, and I am going straight to the podium. I am going to legally repossess every single thing my sister and her husband own right in front of the entire city. I did not even have the chance to finalize my outfit for the ribbon cutting ceremony when my phone buzzed with an urgent text from Mama Beatrice. The message demanded my immediate presence at her house for an emergency family meeting. There was no explanation, just a rigid command that I was expected to drop whatever I was doing and show up. I knew exactly what this was. Marcus had officially filed the worthless shell company documents with the state, and now the thieves were gathering to officially strip the crown off my head. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. I wore a tailored crimson suit that screamed authority. I did not look like a woman about to be led to the slaughter. I looked like the executioner. I grabbed my keys, the hidden flash drive, and the burner phone I had retrieved from the pantry jar, slipping them securely into my structured leather handbag. When I arrived at my mother house, the atmosphere in the formal living room felt like a corporate tribunal. They had arranged themselves perfectly for an ambush. Mama Beatrice sat rigid and imposing in her high-backed armchair at the head of the coffee table. Chloe and Marcus were seated together on the plush velvet sofa. They were sitting entirely too close for two people who were supposedly just in-laws, their shoulders brushing in a sickening display of quiet solidarity. And then there was Preston. He was standing by the fireplace, leaning against the mantel with his arms crossed over his chest, looking down at the room like a colonial overseer inspecting his newly acquired plantation. Take a seat, Nia Mama Beatrice ordered, pointing to a single isolated chair placed directly in the center of the room. We have a very serious matter to discuss regarding your recent behavior and the future of this family. I walked over and sat down, crossing my legs smoothly. I kept my posture impeccably straight, resting my hands on my handbag. I looked at Marcus. He refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to stare sorrowfully at his polished dress shoes. He was already slipping into his character. Marcus came to us this afternoon deeply concerned about your mental state. Mama Beatrice began, her voice dripping with artificial suffocating pity. He told us how erratic you have been acting. The aggressive outbursts at Sunday dinner, your paranoia about Preston finances, your sheer inability to manage the stress of your own company. It is clear that you are spiraling, Nia. You are having a complete psychological breakdown. I tilted my head, looking directly at my husband. A psychological breakdown, I repeated, my voice deadly calm. Is that what you told them, Marcus? You think I am losing my mind? Marcus finally looked up, twisting his features into a mask of pure martyred agony. I am just trying to protect you, baby. You are working yourself to death. You are pushing away your own family. I could not just stand by and watch you destroy everything we built because you are too stubborn to admit you need professional help. We had to intervene before you did irreparable damage to your own life. Before I could tear his pathetic monologue apart, Preston pushed himself off the fireplace mantel and stepped into my line of sight. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, relishing the authority he thought he had just legally stolen from me. Let us cut past the emotional baggage, Nia Preston drawled, using that same patronizing tone that always made my blood boil. The reality is that your commercial development firm has outgrown your capacity to manage it. You are a talented designer, sure, but running a multi-million-dollar enterprise requires a level of executive temperament that you simply do not possess. You are too emotional. You are too erratic. For your own good and for the financial preservation of this family, Marcus and I had to step in and make the hard executive decisions you were too weak to make. I maintained absolute silence, letting him dig his own grave with every arrogant syllable. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, Preston continued pulling a thick folder from the mantel and tossing it onto the coffee table right in front of me. The state of Georgia officially recognized the transfer of all your corporate assets, liquid capital, and commercial properties into Sterling Vanguard Holdings. You signed the paperwork yourself yesterday. You legally surrendered your voting shares and your executive power. Preston smiled, a wide, predatory grin that showed all of his perfectly whitened teeth. He genuinely thought he had just conquered a black woman empire without breaking a single sweat. We are restructuring the entire organization under my primary corporate umbrella, he stated proudly. Marcus will act as the managing director to oversee the transition. You will no longer be burdened with the stress of making any financial or operational decisions. In fact, you no longer own the company at all. But because we are family, and because Marcus is a generous husband, we have decided to keep you on the payroll. You are just an employee now, Naya. You will receive a standard base salary to continue drafting blueprints, but all executive power belongs to us. Chloe leaned forward on the sofa, unable to hide the absolute radiant glee shining in her eyes. It is for the best, Nia. You were always so obsessed with being a boss that you forgot how to be a normal person. Now you can finally just do your little drawings and let the men handle the real business. Plus, the family legacy is finally secure. Preston and Marcus are going to take your little firm and turn it into a national powerhouse. I looked down at the folder resting on the coffee table. It was the exact same packet of documents I had signed. They were parading a hollow, empty shell corporation in front of my face, entirely convinced they had just executed the heist of the century. They thought I was sitting in that chair, completely ruined, stripped of my wealth, my title, and my dignity. I let out a slow, deliberate breath. I looked at Preston, who was practically glowing with unearned white privilege. I looked at Marcus, the traitor who had sold me out to sleep with my sister. I looked at Chloe, the golden child who believed she was entitled to the fruits of my labor. And finally, I looked at Mama Beatrice, the woman who had orchestrated this entire dynamic of abuse. Are you completely finished? I asked, my voice slicing through the thick, self-congratulatory air in the room. Mama Beatrice frowned, clearly irritated that I was not sobbing or begging for my company back. "You should be thanking us," she snapped. "We just saved you from your own incompetence. You should be on your knees showing some gratitude to your husband and your brother-in-law for stepping up to clean your messes." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. The sheer venom in her voice was not a sudden burst of anger. It was a deeply rooted resentment that had finally been given permission to breathe in the open air. I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy this woman's affection. I paid off the mortgage on the very house we were sitting in. I funded her extravagant birthday trips to the Caribbean. I endured her constant belittling just to keep the peace. And here she was, sitting in a living room I had helped furnish, demanding that I drop to my knees and thank a mediocre white man for stealing my life's work. Gratitude. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You want me to be grateful that my sister and my husband conspired to commit corporate theft? It is not theft when it stays in the family." Mama Beatrice fired back, shifting her weight in her high-backed armchair. "It is asset reallocation. Preston explained it to me perfectly. Your little firm was drowning in diversity initiatives and local projects. Preston is taking it global. He is elevating the family name. You should be proud to contribute to something bigger than your own selfish ego." "My ego," I said softly. "Yes, your ego," she snapped, leaning forward so aggressively the gold chains around her neck clanked together. "You have always been so obsessed with proving you are better than Chloe. You built that company just to show off, just to throw your money in our faces to prove you did not need us. But what do you actually have to show for it, Nia? You have an empty house. You have bank accounts you cannot take to the grave. Chloe is the one actually building a legacy for this family." Chloe straightened her posture on the velvet sofa, crossing her legs, and looking down at me with absolute disdain. "Mom is right, Nia. You have to look at the bigger picture. Preston and I have the twins. We have private school tuition, country club fees, networking galas to host. Our expenses are astronomical because we are operating at a completely different tier of society. We need the liquid capital from your firm to maintain the sterling brand. Your money serves a higher purpose with us." I looked at Marcus, my husband, the man who had held my hand in sterile clinic waiting rooms while we waited for test results. "And you agree with this, Marcus? You think my company should be liquidated to pay for Chloe's country club dues?" Marcus refused to make eye contact. He stared intently at a spot on the Persian rug, playing the role of the reluctant peacemaker. "It is for the best, Nia. You need to rest. We are just reallocating the resources where they are needed most right now. The pressure of the business was making you unstable. I am doing this to save you from yourself." Mama Beatrice slammed her hand against the armrest of her chair, drawing the attention back to her. "Stop questioning your husband, Nia. He is doing what a real man is supposed to do. He is taking charge of a hysterical woman. You need to surrender those assets to your sister and be done with it." I felt the air in the room grow thick and heavy. Surrender my assets to Chloe. The assets I built with my own hands. The company I sacrificed my 20s to build. "What else are you going to do with all that money?" Mama Beatrice yelled, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated cruelty. The words she spoke next were designed to be a lethal strike, a calculated blow aimed directly at my deepest, most private agony. "Chloe has children. She gave this family heirs. You are completely barren, Nia. You are practically 33 years old, and your womb is a graveyard. You cannot even give your husband a child. What on earth do you need a $10 million company for?" The room went dead silent. Even Preston, who had been gloating by the fireplace, visibly stiffened. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. I felt a sudden sharp ringing in my ears. For 3 years, Marcus and I had silently battled infertility. We had endured endless rounds of invasive treatments, agonizing hormone injections, and devastating negative pregnancy tests. Every single failure had shattered a piece of my heart. I had wept in my mother's arms after my second miscarriage, begging for comfort, seeking the warmth of maternal reassurance. She had stroked my hair and told me God had a plan. Now I realized she had simply been cataloging my trauma, filing away my greatest heartbreak to use as a weapon for this exact moment. She was weaponizing my infertility to justify stripping me of my wealth and handing it to her golden child. Because I could not produce an heir, my mother had officially classified me as a defective, worthless commodity whose only remaining purpose was to be financially harvested. I was not a daughter to her. I was just a bank account that had failed its biological duty. I looked at Chloe. She did not look shocked by the viciousness of our mother's words. She looked entirely justified. She genuinely believed that her fertility entitled her to the fruits of my relentless labor. I looked at Marcus. The man who had cried with me over those negative tests was now sitting shoulder to shoulder with the woman who was going to take my money to fund his illicit affair. He did not defend me. He did not utter a single word of protest against my mother's vicious attack. His silence was the loudest, most deafening betrayal of all. He had traded our vows, our shared grief, and my dignity for a seat at Preston's collapsing table. I sat frozen in the center of the room. The cruelty was so absolute, so profoundly evil, that it stripped away the last remaining shreds of daughterly obligation I held in my heart. The lingering hope that maybe beneath the toxicity, my mother actually loved me was instantly vaporized. She did not love me. She despised me. And she was completely willing to destroy my soul if it meant keeping her white son-in-law comfortable and her golden child wealthy. The shock slowly receded, leaving behind a cold, crystalline void. They thought this emotional decimation would break me. They thought bringing up my infertility would send me spiraling into a puddle of tears, forcing me to run out of the house in shame, while they divided up my corporate accounts like vultures picking at a carcass. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the freezing air into my lungs. My heart stopped racing. My hands resting on my structured leather handbag did not tremble. I was no longer a daughter seeking validation. I was no longer a wife hoping to save a marriage. I was the predator, and they had just willingly walked into the slaughterhouse and locked the door behind themselves. They waited for the tears. My mother sat back in her high-backed armchair, expecting me to crumble into a pathetic sobbing mess. Chloe adjusted her skirt, already preparing her fake face of sympathy. Marcus kept his eyes glued to the floor, playing the burdened husband, forced to put his crazy wife in a mental cage. Preston just smirked, waiting to collect his prize. But my eyes remained completely dry. I did not shed a single tear. I did not gasp for air or beg for their understanding. The absolute stillness in my body caused the smug satisfaction in the room to slowly curdle into confusion. I reached down and unzipped my structured leather handbag. The sharp metallic sound of the zipper echoed loudly in the quiet room. I reached inside and pulled out the heavy vintage glass jar from the top shelf of my pantry. I held it up to the light. Marcus finally lifted his head. His eyes locked onto the glass jar. I watched the exact millisecond his brain registered what I was holding. The color violently drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashy, terrified gray. His jaw dropped open, but his vocal cords completely paralyzed. "What on earth is that?" Mama Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill with irritation. "Why are you pulling kitchenware out of your purse in the middle of a serious family intervention?" I did not answer her. I lifted the heavy glass jar high above my head and brought it down with blinding, merciless force directly onto the center of my mother's custom glass coffee table. The explosion of shattering glass ripped through the living room like a bomb. Thousands of jagged shards flew across the Persian rug. Mama Beatrice shrieked, throwing her hands over her head and jumping back in her chair. Preston shouted a curse, stumbling backward toward the fireplace. Chloe screamed and curled into a tight ball on the sofa to shield her face. "Have you lost your absolute mind?" Mama Beatrice roared, recovering from her shock. "You are destroying my house." I ignored her completely. From the glittering wreckage of shattered glass on the table frame, I picked up the cheap black burner phone. Marcus lunged forward, his hands reaching out in a blind panic. "Nia, no!" he shouted, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Give that to me right now." I held up my free hand, pointing a single commanding finger straight at his chest. I did not raise my voice, but the lethal authority in my tone stopped him dead in his tracks. Take one more step toward me, Marcus, and I will have you arrested for assault before you can even blink. Sit down. He collapsed back onto the velvet sofa, his breathing heavy and ragged, looking exactly like a man stepping up to the gallows. What is going on? Preston demanded, his arrogant posture faltering as he looked back and forth between my terrified husband and the burner phone in my hand. What is that phone? I unlocked the screen effortlessly. Marcus had been so unbelievably arrogant, so confident in his ability to hide his second life, that he had not even bothered to set a passcode. I navigated straight to the voice memo application. Marcus always recorded his business calls to protect himself in financial disputes. He was just too careless to turn the automatic recording feature off when he used his secret phone. This, I announced to the room, making sure my voice carried into every corner, is the actual sound of your family legacy. I turned the volume up to maximum and pressed play. The audio quality was crystal clear. The room was instantly filled with the heavy, unmistakable sound of skin slapping against skin, accompanied by the frantic, breathy gasps of two people tangled in a bed. Then a voice rang out from the speaker. It was high-pitched, desperate, and moaning my husband's name. Oh God, Marcus, yes, right there. The absolute obscenity of the recording paralyzed every single person in the living room. Preston's arrogant colonial stance completely disintegrated. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He recognized that voice immediately. It was the voice of his beautiful, devoted high society wife. Mama Beatrice gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Her eyes darted to Chloe, who was now pressing herself deep into the corner of the sofa, looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. But the recording did not stop at their repulsive intimacy. The heavy breathing on the audio eventually slowed, giving way to the rustle of hotel sheets. Then Chloe's voice came through again, sharp and calculating. Did you get that stupid girl to sign the power of attorney yet? Her recorded voice panted. Preston needs the cash injection before Friday. The bank is breathing down his neck. If we lose the penthouse, I am going to lose my mind. Marcus's deep, rumbling chuckle echoed from the speaker, filling my mother's living room with the sound of pure betrayal. Do not worry about Preston's miserable portfolio, baby. Nia is so exhausted she will sign anything I put in front of her. She thinks it is a protective family trust. We will merge her assets into the holding company, drain her liquid capital to save your husband's sinking ship, and once the dust settles, we will finally have the capital to leave them both behind. Just play along at Sunday dinner. I have everything under control. I pressed pause. The silence that slammed into the living room was deafening. It was so quiet I could hear the rapid, shallow breathing of my sister and my husband. The illusion of the perfect sterling empire was entirely obliterated. The golden child was a homewrecker and a fraud. The brilliant white savior was a cuckolded, bankrupt failure whose wife was sleeping with a black man to pay his bills. And the devoted, caring husband was a corporate thief who had sold out his marriage for a piece of stolen wealth. I stood tall in the center of the shattered glass, looking at the absolute devastation written across their faces. My psychological breakdown was a lie. My incompetence was a lie. The only truth in this room was the audio recording that had just ripped their pretentious, toxic lives to shreds. I looked directly at Preston. The vein in his forehead was bulging violently. His hands were curled into tight fists at his sides. It seems your devoted wife has been handling a lot more than just the children and the country club networking. Preston, I said, my voice dripping with lethal satisfaction. She has been handling my husband in a luxury hotel suite paid for by my credit card. Preston slowly turned his head to look at Chloe. His eyes were completely devoid of sanity. Chloe shrank back, tears streaming down her face, violently shaking her head. Preston, I can explain. Chloe sobbed, her hands reaching out toward him. It is not what it sounds like. He manipulated me. I laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound that echoed off the high ceiling. Manipulated you? You literally just asked him if he got the stupid girl to sign the papers so you could save your husband's failing investments. You are not a victim, Chloe. You are a parasite. Mama Beatrice finally found her voice. She stumbled forward, her designer shoes crunching over the broken glass of her beloved coffee table. She pointed a trembling finger at Marcus, completely ignoring the fact that her own daughter was the co-conspirator. "You animal," Mama Beatrice screamed at Marcus. "You came into my house and disrespected my daughter. You tried to destroy Chloe's marriage." I stared at my mother, genuinely marveling at the depths of her delusion. Even now, faced with undeniable audio evidence of Chloe plotting to steal my company and sleeping with my husband, Mama Beatrice was still trying to protect the golden child. She was entirely willing to throw Marcus to the wolves, but she was desperately trying to shield Chloe from Preston's wrath to preserve her proximity to whiteness. I did not let her rewrite the narrative. I took a step forward, commanding the space. "Stop playing the protective mother," I demanded, my voice cutting through her hysterical screaming. "You do not care about my marriage. You do not care that my husband betrayed me. You only care that your perfect, wealthy son-in-law just found out his wife is a cheating thief, and now your country club status is going up in flames." I dropped the burner phone onto the velvet sofa right between Marcus and Chloe. They both flinched away from it like it was a live grenade. "You all thought you could put me in a corner, strip me of my assets, and parade around Atlanta like royalty," I said, looking at the four broken people surrounding me. "You thought my infertility was the ultimate weapon you could use to break my spirit. You thought I was weak." I adjusted the cuffs of my crimson suit jacket, feeling the absolute intoxicating rush of total control. "But you forgot one very important detail." I continued, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "I am an architect. I know exactly how to find the structural flaws in a building. And I know exactly how to detonate the foundation." The heavy silence in the living room stretched until it felt like the walls were closing in. I watched Preston closely, waiting for the inevitable explosion. His face was a mottled, dangerous red, and his hands were clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles were bone white. He stared at the burner phone sitting on the velvet cushions, the digital proof of his wife's infidelity glaring back at him. But then something truly grotesque happened. Preston's shoulders slowly dropped. The rigid, violent tension in his jaw relaxed. He shifted his gaze from the burner phone to the thick folder of legal documents resting on the shattered remains of the coffee table. A low, dark, and utterly humorless chuckle vibrated in his chest. It grew louder, echoing in the ruined room until he was outright laughing. "You actually thought this was going to ruin me," Preston said, shaking his head as if he were dealing with a slow child. He uncrossed his arms and took a step toward me, his arrogance miraculously fully restored. "You thought you could walk in here, play a little audio clip of my wife acting like a cheap escort, and watch my entire world collapse. Let me educate you on how power actually works, Nia. A cheating wife is an unfortunate domestic dispute. We have lawyers to handle messy divorces and infidelity clauses. But a signed, notarized transfer of a $10 million commercial real estate portfolio into my holding company, that is a permanent legal reality." He tapped the toe of his designer shoe against the folder. "You can play your little recordings for whoever you want. You can scream about betrayal until your lungs give out. At the end of the day, I am walking away with your entire empire, and you are walking away with a broken marriage and an empty bank account. I win. I always win." Marcus, who had been sitting frozen in terror on the sofa, watched Preston claim the financial victory. The realization that Preston was not going to physically attack him, that the white man was far more interested in the money than the marriage, washed over Marcus like a tidal wave of relief. In a matter of seconds, the terrified caught rat completely vanished. Marcus straightened his posture, pulling his shoulders back. He reached up and smoothed his expensive tie, the very tie I had bought him for our anniversary. When Marcus looked at me, the mask of the loving, concerned husband was entirely gone. His eyes were cold, flat, and filled with a resentful malice he had clearly been hiding for years. "Preston is right," Marcus sneered, leaning back against the velvet cushions with an audacity that was breathtaking. "You brought this entirely on yourself, Nia. You were always so obsessed with your blueprints, your construction sites, and your absolute need to control everything. You emasculated me every single day by acting like you were the king of the castle. I had to look elsewhere for a woman who actually knew how to appreciate a man." Chloe, seeing that her husband and her lover had successfully pivoted the conversation back to money and misogyny, instantly dropped her tearful victim act. She wiped her face, sitting up straight and crossing her legs. The smug, entitled superiority rushed right back into her features. "You could not give him what he needed, Nia," Chloe said, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "I gave him the affection you were too busy to provide. And honestly, this asset transfer is simply the universe correcting a mistake. You do not need millions of dollars. You cannot even have children. You are a barren workaholic. That money belongs with my family, where it can actually be used to build a generational legacy for my twins. You should consider this your final contribution to the people who tolerated you for all these years." I turned my head slowly, looking at Mama Beatrice. My mother had just listened to her son-in-law confess to stealing my company. Her daughter confessed to sleeping with my husband, and my husband blamed me for his own infidelity. I waited to see if there was a single ounce of maternal instinct left in her soul. Mama Beatrice crossed her arms, looking at me with pure, unfiltered disdain. "You should be ashamed of yourself for secretly recording people, Nia. That is exactly the kind of deceptive, untrustworthy behavior that proves you are mentally unfit to handle wealth. Preston is the legal owner of your firm now. You need to accept your place. If you apologize and behave, maybe he will still let you work as a junior drafter so you can pay your rent." The absolute lack of humanity in that room was astounding. They were not just greedy. They were fundamentally broken, toxic people who fed off the destruction of others to sustain their own illusions of grandeur. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They believed with every fiber of their being that they held all the cards, that I was standing in front of them completely defeated, humiliated, and stripped of my life work. I did not scream. I did not throw another glass jar. I simply stood up. My movements were smooth, unhurried, and perfectly controlled. I reached down and picked up my structured leather handbag, snapping the gold clasp shut. I looked at Preston, whose chest was puffed out in a display of triumphant white privilege. I looked at Marcus, the cheating coward who thought he had secured a golden parachute. I looked at Chloe, the sister who believed her fertility made her a queen. And I looked at Mama Beatrice, the woman who had sold her own daughter to the highest bidder. "You are entirely correct about one thing, Preston," I said, my voice eerily calm, carrying the distinct sharp edge of a blade being drawn from its sheath. "A signed legal document is indeed a permanent reality." I reached up and slowly buttoned the center button of my crimson suit jacket. I smoothed the lapels, standing tall, letting the full weight of my presence fill the shattered living room. Preston smirked, pointing toward the foyer. "Now that we understand each other, you are trespassing on my family time. Leave your house keys and the keys to the Porsche on the entryway table. They belong to Sterling Vanguard Holdings now. Get out of the house right now." I offered him a smile that did not reach my eyes. A cold, hollow smile that made his smug expression falter for just a fraction of a second. "Enjoy your victory tonight, Preston," I said softly. "Drink my mother expensive liquor. Celebrate your brilliance. I will leave you all to your celebrations." I turned on my heel, the sound of my designer shoes crunching over the broken glass as I walked toward the heavy oak front door. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob and glanced over my shoulder one final time. "Oh, and Preston," I added, my tone light and conversational, "make sure you wear your absolute best suit tomorrow. I will see you and the rest of this family at the grand ribbon cutting ceremony for your Oakwood commercial project in the morning." Preston let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. "You are not invited to the Oakwood ceremony, Nia. Employees do not get to stand on the executive stage. Security will throw you out before you even reach the parking lot." I just smiled, pulled the heavy oak door open, and stepped out into the cool Atlanta evening. "You cannot throw out the owner," I whispered to the empty air, the heavy door clicking firmly shut behind me. The crisp morning air of Atlanta did nothing to cool the fire burning in my veins as I parked my car 2 blocks away from the Oakwood Commercial Plaza. The development was a sprawling, pretentious monument to Preston's ego, built with glass steel and a mountain of toxic debt. Today was supposed to be his crowning achievement. The grand ribbon cutting ceremony was heavily publicized, designed to signal to the entire city that Sterling Capital was an untouchable powerhouse. I stepped out of my car, smoothing the lapels of my tailored white suit. I chose white intentionally. It was the color of a blank slate, the color of a complete erasure. I walked toward the plaza, blending perfectly into the periphery of the massive crowd. Preston had spared no expense, using the very last drops of credit he could scrape together to put on a flawless show. A massive white tent was set up in the central courtyard, shielding the guests from the Georgia sun. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated with silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The guest list was a highly curated collection of Atlanta's elite. There were city council members, local politicians, and dozens of wealthy white investors laughing and shaking hands. And right there, standing center stage on a raised platform behind a thick red velvet ribbon, was my family. They had seamlessly slipped their masks back on completely, burying the explosive, horrific truths that had shattered our mother's living room just 12 hours prior. Mama Beatrice stood off to the side, draped in a custom emerald green dress with a matching wide-brimmed hat. She was beaming with aggressive pride, sipping her champagne and nodding at the wealthy white investors passing by. She looked absolutely thrilled to be adjacent to such concentrated generational wealth, completely ignoring the fact that her daughter's marriage and her family's integrity were lying in ruins. Chloe stood right next to Preston, playing the role of the devoted, adoring, high society wife to absolute perfection. She wore a designer blush pink dress, her hair perfectly blown out, smiling brightly for the flashing cameras of the local press. If you looked closely, you could see the rigid tension in her shoulders, the way she kept a small physical distance between herself and Preston. But to the untrained eye, she was the picture of marital bliss. And then there was Marcus. My treacherous, opportunistic husband was standing right there on the platform with them. He puffed his chest out proudly, wearing a brand new navy suit, mingling with the investors as if he belonged in their ranks. The sheer audacity of him standing shoulder to shoulder with the man whose wife he had been sleeping with was staggering. Greed had bonded them together in a grotesque brotherhood. They both believed that the forged documents Marcus filed yesterday morning had officially secured their financial salvation. They thought they had successfully harvested my entire life's work. Preston tapped the microphone, the sharp feedback silencing the crowd. He stepped up to the podium, flashing a charismatic, blindingly white smile. The cameras flashed rapidly as he looked out over the sea of wealthy elites. Thank you all for being here today, to witness the realization of a profound vision. Preston's voice boomed over the high-end speaker system, dripping with unearned authority. Oakwood is not just a commercial plaza. It is a testament to perseverance, to navigating difficult economic climates, and coming out stronger on the other side. He paused, placing a loving, possessive hand over Chloe's. I could not have built this empire without the unwavering support of my beautiful wife Chloe and the incredibly solid foundation of our family. In business, you face constant challenges. You face people who doubt you, people who lack the executive temperament to see the bigger picture. But when you have a family that stands united, a family that pools its resources and its strength to protect the Sterling legacy, there is absolutely nothing that can stop you. The crowd erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. Mama Beatrice clapped louder than anyone, wiping a fake tear of joy from her cheek. Marcus nodded deeply, looking out at the crowd with an arrogant smirk, clearly believing that Preston's speech was a direct, victorious jab at me. Preston picked up a pair of oversized ceremonial gold scissors. He held them high in the air, preparing to cut the thick red ribbon and officially open the plaza. The press photographers raised their cameras, ready to capture the triumphant moment. It was time. I signaled to the 3 unmarked black SUVs parked at the edge of the courtyard. The doors opened in unison. Jordan, my brilliant corporate attorney, stepped out holding a thick leather briefcase. He was flanked by the county sheriff and 4 uniformed deputies. I walked forward, stepping out of the shadows and directly into the center aisle. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, measured, lethal grace of a woman who owned every single piece of ground she was stepping on. I walked down the center aisle of the massive white tent, my heels striking the pavement in a slow, rhythmic cadence that commanded absolute attention. The low, polite murmur of the wealthy investors and city politicians immediately died out, replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. The sea of tailored suits and designer dresses naturally parted to make way for me. The visual impact of my crisp white suit, contrasting against the dark, heavy uniforms of the county sheriff and his four armed deputies, created a shockwave that rippled straight to the front of the crowd. Jordan flanked my right side, gripping his leather briefcase like a loaded weapon. Up on the raised platform, the carefully orchestrated illusion of the Sterling family empire completely shattered. Preston froze like a statue, the oversized ceremonial gold scissors suspended awkwardly in midair. The arrogant, victorious smile slid right off his face, replaced by a sudden, rigid confusion. Chloe let out a sharp gasp, her perfectly manicured hands flying up to cover her mouth. Marcus physically took a step backward, his eyes darting frantically from me to the uniformed officers marching behind my shoulders. He knew exactly what kind of documents were hidden in my office, and seeing law enforcement walking toward him clearly triggered a primal, terrifying realization. Mama Beatrice was the first to attempt damage control. She stepped out of line, her emerald green dress rustling aggressively as she hurried to the edge of the stage. She plastered on a tight, frantic smile, trying to play the role of the concerned matriarch in front of her high society audience. "Nia, what on earth are you doing?" my mother hissed, pitching her voice low but failing to hide her mounting panic. "You are making an absolute fool of yourself. Get out of here right now before you ruin your brother-in-law's big moment. Security will be here any second." I did not even look at her. I did not break my stride. I kept my eyes locked dead onto Preston. Preston dropped the gold scissors. They hit the wooden stage with a loud, hollow thud. He quickly grabbed the microphone stand, his knuckles turning white as he tried to use his white privilege to command the room. Sheriff Preston barked into the microphone, his voice booming over the high-end speaker system. "I demand that you remove this woman from my property immediately. She is trespassing on a private corporate event, and she is currently undergoing a severe psychological crisis. Escort her off the premises before I press charges." The county sheriff did not even blink. He stopped at the base of the platform, resting his hand casually on his utility belt, and looked up at Preston with an expression of pure, unadulterated apathy. "I am not here to escort anyone off the premises, Mr. Sterling," the sheriff replied, his voice carrying easily across the silent courtyard. "I am here executing a lawful civil standby and serving official court documents. You might want to let the lady speak." Preston's mouth dropped open. The color drained completely from his face. The wealthy investors in the front row began whispering furiously to one another, sensing the smell of financial blood in the water. I walked right past my mother, climbed the 3 short steps onto the raised platform, and walked directly up to Preston. He tried to physically block the podium, puffing his chest out in a desperate last-ditch effort to intimidate me. I did not flinch. I reached out, grabbed the microphone right out of his trembling hand, and yanked it away from him. I turned to face the crowd of investors, politicians, and socialites. I looked out over the sea of faces that had just been applauding a man who built his life on theft, deception, and the exploitation of a black woman. I stood tall, my voice echoing through the massive white tent with absolute lethal clarity. "I apologize for the interruption to your morning," I announced, my tone completely calm and unapologetically authoritative. "My name is Nia, and I am the founder and lead developer of the commercial architecture firm that Mr. Sterling just tried to claim as his own. But I am not standing up here today to talk about architecture. I am standing up here because as of 8 o'clock last night, I am the primary creditor holding the exclusive rights to foreclose on this entire project. And I believe the actual owner of this property should have a few words before any ribbons are cut." The crowd erupted into a chaotic frenzy of shocked gasps and loud murmurs. Several investors immediately pulled out their cell phones, frantically dialing their financial advisors. Preston lunged forward, trying to grab the microphone back. "You are out of your mind," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic, entirely abandoning his polished southern charm. Do not listen to a single word she says. She is having a mental breakdown. She legally signed her entire company and all of her assets over to my holding company yesterday afternoon. She does not own a single piece of debt. She does not even own the clothes on her back. She is a disgruntled employee trying to ruin a multi-million-dollar launch. I sidestepped his desperate lunges effortlessly. I looked at Marcus, who was now sweating profusely, realizing that his grand heist was unraveling on a public stage. Then I looked at Chloe, who was shaking so violently her blush-pink dress vibrated. Finally, I turned my attention back to the crowd. Mr. Sterling is under the tragic delusion that he successfully absorbed my liquid capital to save his crumbling toxic debt portfolio, I said, speaking directly into the microphone. He genuinely believes that the documents my husband filed with the state this morning made him the owner of my empire. I gestured to Jordan, who stepped up onto the stage and popped open the brass latches of his leather briefcase. But there is a very big difference between pretending to be a visionary and actually knowing how to read a financial contract. I continued, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. Because I did not sign my assets over to Preston Sterling, and the paper my treacherous husband filed today is nothing but a worthless, empty forgery. Jordan stepped forward, unsnapping the brass locks of his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of verified court-stamped documents and handed them to me. I slapped them down onto the wooden podium, the sharp smack echoing through the microphone and startling the front row of investors. "You see, Preston," I explained, leaning into the mic so every single person in the tent could hear the precise mechanics of his ruin. When my husband tried to manipulate me into signing away my life's work, I did not throw a tantrum. I called my attorney. Yesterday morning, hours before I signed your little trap, I legally transferred 100% of my properties, my firm, and my liquid capital into an irrevocable offshore blind trust. The entity Marcus so eagerly registered with the state today contains absolutely nothing. You did not steal an empire, you stole a ghost. Preston staggered back a step. He looked at Marcus, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Marcus was shaking his head, his hands raised in a desperate pleading gesture, muttering that it was impossible that he had checked the routing numbers himself. "But I'm not just here to give you a lesson in corporate compliance." I continued, my voice slicing through the rising murmurs of the stunned crowd. Because while Marcus was busy filing fraudulent paperwork, I was busy reallocating my actual assets. I used my cash reserves routed through an anonymous third-party brokerage known as Obsidian Financial to reach out to First Heritage National Bank. Preston stopped breathing. The name of his primary lender hit him like a physical blow to the chest. "I bought your debt, Preston. Every single toxic, defaulting, leveraged note you have to your name. I bought the commercial loans for this plaza. I bought the mortgage on the luxury penthouse you share with my sister. I bought the liens on your imported cars. As of 8 o'clock last night, Obsidian Financial is the sole owner of your entire debt portfolio. And as the primary note holder, I am officially exercising the acceleration clause due to your unauthorized attempt to transfer corporate equity." Preston scrambled for his pockets, pulling out his cell phone. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He did not even have to dial his wealth manager. His screen was already flooded with automated alerts. I watched his eyes dart frantically across the glass as he read the notifications. His corporate accounts were frozen, his personal credit lines were locked, his entire financial existence had just been zeroed out. "This is illegal!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking wildly as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "You cannot just seize my assets without a court order." "Actually, Mr. Sterling," the county sheriff interjected, stepping up onto the platform, his boots heavy and deliberate against the wood. "She already has the court order. A judge signed off on the asset seizure warrants at 6 o'clock this morning. My deputies are currently changing the locks on your penthouse and seizing the vehicles from your parking garage." The wealthy elite in the audience began physically backing away from the stage, instinctively distancing themselves from a sinking ship. Several investors were already speed-walking toward the parking lot, frantically calling their legal teams to pull their funding from any Sterling-affiliated project. The grand, untouchable white savior of my family was currently hyperventilating on a stage he no longer owned. But the demolition was not finished. I turned my gaze away from Preston and locked eyes with Marcus. My husband was sweating through his brand new navy suit. He looked around the stage searching for an exit, but two armed deputies had already moved to block the stairs. Did you really think I would not check the equity on my grandmother's brownstone, Marcus? I asked softly, stepping away from the podium and walking directly up to him. Did you really think you could forge my signature on a $500,000 commercial mortgage wire, the funds to save your brother-in-law, and I would just smile and play the dutiful, oblivious wife? Marcus dropped to his knees, the polished, arrogant wealth manager completely disintegrated into a weeping, pathetic shell of a man. Nia, please, he begged, reaching out to grab the hem of my white trousers. I was going to put the money back. I swear to God. Preston promised me a massive return on the investment. We were going to be set for life. I did it for us. You did it to fund your $5,000 nights at the St. Regis with my sister, I replied, my voice turning to absolute ice. I kicked my foot back, breaking his grip on my suit. The sheriff stepped forward, unhooking the steel handcuffs from his utility belt. Marcus, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and first-degree mortgage fraud, the sheriff announced, grabbing Marcus by the shoulder and hauling him roughly to his feet. Marcus thrashed, sobbing hysterically as the cold steel snapped shut around his wrists. He looked desperately at Mama Beatrice, begging her to do something, begging her to use her influence. But Mama Beatrice was frozen in horror, her hands clamped over her mouth as she watched her prized son-in-law get publicly stripped of his wealth, and the man she had just praised get paraded away in shackles. "This is a federal felony, Marcus," I said, leaning in close as the deputies secured his arms behind his back. "You used a digital notary across state lines to steal an inheritance from a black woman. You are not going to a minimum security resort for white-collar criminals. You are going to federal prison." Chloe finally broke. She let out a blood-curdling, guttural scream, dropping to her knees on the stage. She grabbed her designer hair, sobbing violently as the reality of her new life crashed down on her. Her luxury penthouse was gone. Her stolen money was gone. Her husband was a bankrupt pariah, and her lover was currently being dragged off the stage by armed law enforcement. The perfect golden child was left kneeling on the floor of a repossessed property, wearing a dress she could no longer afford. The wealthy elites who had been drinking Preston's expensive champagne just moments ago were already treating him like a contagious disease. A city councilman, who had been shaking Preston's hand 5 minutes prior, practically sprinted past him, refusing to make eye contact. Investors turned their backs as Preston reached out to them, ignoring his desperate, frantic pleas for a bridge loan. The social death of Preston Sterling was absolute and instantaneous. He was a bankrupt fraud standing on a stage he no longer owned, and high society was washing their hands of him in real time. Armed deputies marched Marcus down the side steps of the platform. Chloe wailed, the sound raw and pathetic, reaching out with trembling hands for the man who had just blown up her marriage and her bank account. Marcus did not even look at her. He kept his head down, utterly destroyed by the realization that his greed had just earned him a federal prison sentence. Mama Beatrice watched her golden child weeping on the wooden floorboards. Then she looked at the federal agents leading her favorite son-in-law toward a squad car. Finally, her eyes locked onto me. The gears in her mind turned with terrifying speed. She realized instantly that the Sterling Empire was dead, and the only person left with a single dime to her name was the daughter she had spent 32 years trying to break. Mama Beatrice scrambled across the stage, her emerald green dress catching on a stray microphone cable. She shoved right past her sobbing golden child and grabbed my arm. "Nia, my sweet girl," she cried, forcing a thick layer of fake maternal panic into her voice. "You have to help us. We can fix this. You are my brilliant daughter. You have the money. Just clear the debt and we can keep the family together. Please, baby, do not do this to your own blood." I looked down at her hands gripping the sleeve of my pristine white suit. I did not pull away immediately. I let her hold on for just a second, letting her feel the absolute freezing detachment radiating from my posture. Then I smoothly reached into my structured leather handbag. I bypassed the encrypted flash drives and the offshore bank statements. I pulled out a single crisp $20 bill. I gently pried my mother's trembling fingers off my jacket and pressed the green paper directly into her palm. "Here is your black tax for this month, Mom," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the chaos of the collapsing stage. "Buy Chloe a cheap box of tissues. From this second forward, I do not have a family." Mama Beatrice stared down at the $20 bill in her hand, her mouth opening and closing without a single sound coming out. The realization that she had successfully alienated her only remaining lifeline finally broke her. She sank to her knees beside my weeping sister, clutching the crumpled cash to her chest. I turned my back on the wreckage. I walked down the center aisle of the tent, my heels clicking a final victorious rhythm against the pavement. I did not look back. Outside the courtyard, my private driver was holding the door open to my matte black Rolls-Royce. I stepped into the plush leather interior and settled back into the seat. Through the tinted window, the scene played out exactly as I had designed it. I watched the police load Marcus into the back of a squad cruiser. I watched Preston standing completely alone in a sea of empty chairs, abandoned by the white elite he worshipped. I watched my mother and sister kneeling in the dirt of a repossessed property. The driver closed the door, sealing away their screaming and their ruin. As the heavy car pulled away from the curb, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. They thought they could bury me under the weight of their entitlement. They did not realize I was the one who designed the tomb.